Have you ever felt a session drag on with slow combat or lost players during a long lore dump? Pacing is the key to actually keeping every moment in your game exciting and engaging. So today what we're going to do, we're going to break down how to control the tempo of your session, balanced fast and slow motions, and keep your players hooked from really the start to the finish. So we're going to cover 3 pillars of the game and how to pace all 3 of them. We have combat, we've got exploration, and we have roleplay, plus some actionable tips for transitioning between those seamlessly. Pacing is about playing the game, not just something that's mystical. So let's get right on into it for the day. What is pacing in Dungeons & Dragons? This is really the rhythm of your session. This is the balance between the tension, between the action, and really downtime. Just like a movie or a book, you're going to see a session both needs highs and it needs lows. It has to have some ebb and flow. If it always stays exactly the same, it can either be too fast or too slow or monotonous. Even a game that's slow-paced, as long as it has those ebbs and flows, works. So, what is the pacing formula? It's actually simple. It's used in writing a lot. You have tension. This is your conflict. This is the risk ahead of you. This can be something as simple as unlocking a door. If there's no risk associated with it, it doesn't really matter. But if there's risk associated, if they know that if they fail to unlock this door, it locks forever, that gives you tension. Regardless of the outcome, that tension brings you higher. Then there's choice. This is player agency. If the players never have choice, the pacing doesn't matter. The more the players are engaged, the more the pacing feels right. So that's really where the balancing act comes. And the second and last thing, well, the third thing, is the release. The rest, the down period. That's actually the consequence. Whether it's good or bad, giving players tension, the ability to choose, and then whatever that reward is, both good and bad, it doesn't always have to be simple. It doesn't always have to be straightforward. It doesn't always have to be complex. But what you do need is a raising of tensions, and then the players need to act. If the players never act, and it's always some external force, that's where pacing fails. So quick analogy. Think of your session like a roller coaster. Thrilling peaks and then calm valleys. As you go through them, that's what makes a great roller coaster. It's not always 100%. That's overwhelming. But if it's just a nice long tour, that may be good for a session or two, but not ongoing. So let's talk about pacing in combat for a second. The first thing you got to do, keep it snappy. A lot of times you hear 5th edition combat drags on for a long time. Now, there's lots of ways, and what I'm about to say isn't the die-hard, end-all, be-all of these. Number 1, the 6-second rule. Give your players 6 seconds to decide their actions. Now, for some tables, that's going to be a little bit too fast, but for my veteran players, that seems right about right. I allow them to talk beforehand, but then once we actually get into it, that's what it's all about. What do you do, also, instead of it's your turn? So by just rephrasing, hey, it's your turn, okay, what do you do? It's a little bit of rephrase that gives a little push to your players, allowing them to react a little bit more spontaneously. I'll get the word right eventually. Now, also reduce downtime. Use initiative tents, initiative trackers, so the players can see where the initiative lies. Have players roll damage with their attacks is a popular one, not a big fan of mine, but make every round count. This is where you are using environmental debris, shifting floors. You're adding urgency to that combat. Also, using legendary layer actions to reduce player wait time, forcing the players to make those moves. The kind of example I use is the floor cracks every round. Fail a dex save and you fall into the lava, as long as you're standing in the wrong spot or the right spot. This gives the players something to think about while they're going throughout their turn. That's a huge deal. Now, when it comes to adding pacing to exploration, you have to add choices, not just descriptions. This is a big one. Instead of you enter a dark forest, you have something to the extent of there are 2 paths. One is overgrown and eerie, and the other has fresh footprints leading through the dark, incredibly spooky forest. Even though I'm not using, incredibly descriptive words, I'm not a fantasy author, you now have a choice. You don't have to choose either of those 2 paths. You could come up with something else, but it forces the players to act upon what was given in front of them and not just something random. Also, I like to use the rule of 3. I provide 3 points of interest: something to investigate, something to interact with, and something to avoid. By doing the power of 3 whenever I'm going into a room, I can give the players a little bit of a nudge in one direction or another. They can choose to still go and interact with that thing that I told them they should be avoiding, but it still makes them move the game forward through choice, which is huge. I also, during exploration, can set a time limit. This adds urgency. The sun sets in 10 minutes. After that, the wolves hunt. This is one of those things where by telling the players this, or allowing them to do this, saying, hey, you have survival, make a survival check, and then literally telling them the sun's setting in 10 minutes, and after that, the wolves come out to hunt in this area, right? It's not something that I just made up, or is it? But that player feels like they're in control because they rolled a check on it. You have 5 rounds before the tunnel floods. Where do you search, or what do you search first? Now, we have a dedicated time limit before they have to leave, where the players can't just spend hours doing something. This is a great way to push the game forward. Sometimes you don't have to do any of this. Sometimes your players do an amazing job of taking the game forward themselves. If they do, then pacing's not your problem. Usually this comes from players having choice. And this then feeds over. Pacing when it comes to role-playing. Sometimes role-playing sessions can seem to take forever. So keep the conversations purposeful. A lot of times when we try to roleplay, we'll just be having a conversation. But what's the character's objective? What's the NPC's objective? The guard captain wants a bribe, but also hates the mayor. Which angle do you exploit? I can actually give them some information that they've gleaned. What angle do you want to take? They don't have to take either. But for new players, giving a little bit of a suggestion to your players is a great way to push this on. And also by limiting your monologues as a dungeon master is huge. You can break up NPC speeches into dialogue exchanges. Let the players ask questions. Give them half information. The more the players participate, the more they feel like the game is progressing, even if they're not. Player choice and player activity is as natural in the pacing elements as anything else. If you want to speed things up, you can escalate the stakes. A hidden agenda or a time pressure, the noble seems nervous, glancing at the clock. Why? Why are they doing that? Do they roll an insight check? Can you figure it out? Is your time actually limited? Do you become more poignant in your questions? It's great when you can hint at those time restrictions. Also, transitioning between scenes is huge. A smooth scene change kind of uses cinematic cut techniques. A hard cut is the door slams shut and suddenly you're in the throne room, right? We have cut from the walking to the throne room to the door slamming shut, and now scene, we're in. We can also do flashbacks or visions if we're touching an amulet. The flashback or vision is a way to monologue or to give pieces of information, but it's very succinct. So that way you can give the players information without having to have them engage so you can move on from it. Because yes, players, I've said over and over and over again, having choice is a huge deal. Sometimes being able to give them a piece of information in such a way where they don't have to go and hunt for it is great through visions and flashbacks, especially in a world of magic. And so you can also pace all of this with resting scenes. So campfire talks, shopping trips, downtime crafts, helping players breathe before their next tension spike. Those breaths, those lows are sometimes needed, especially if it's been go, 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 go. But you have to make sure that it feels natural to have that break, to have that rest. Especially if the players are on a time frame, why would they rest? Not giving a player's time to rest can also be good if they've been resting too much. So finding the right balance with those resting scenes is a huge deal. So the question is, though, when do you speed up or slow down? So let's talk about it. You can speed things up or should push things forward when the players are stuck in analysis paralysis. You hear the beast charging, decide now. You can make them make a decision. Sometimes players get a little bit anxious on that. Sometimes that's what you're trying to get them to feel, because they should feel anxious. The beast is charging. So speeding up is when the players are having problems making decisions. And you can do that simply by, if combat is dragging on. A lot of times it's from low stakes. The remaining goblins flee. Combat ends. Now, there's stakes at hand. The goblins ran away because it was running too slow, so I ended it. Making something for the tension. Rising the tension. What happens now? We didn't finish this combat. They're out there. Now, do we have to worry about it? This is where my tension rises. Going back to the original thing. We have to have tension. Low stakes combats has no tension, which can be boring. Having the goblins run away raises that tension, even without combat being a part of it. The other thing is, when it comes to pacing, how and when do you slow down? So important lore or NPC developments unfolding. So if the players are invested in your lore or in an NPC, this is where you slow down. Give them the information they want and allow them to explore it. That can be fulfilling too. Pace does not mean here. It does not mean here. It means an ebb and flow. So allow your players to be interested in something and then give it to them. Also, if the players are celebrating a victory, the village cheers, your heroes. Where do you go to celebrate? Allow them that moment. That tension has been here, things have been going on. Allow it to come down and then allow it to ebb back up. Remember, the goal is to have something more like a roller coaster. What are some tools, though, that you can use to help improve your pacing? Number one, timers. The use of a physical timer for real-time tension works. Not for every table. But I like timers. I like the idea that exploration has a time limit. I like the idea that you have limited time to act in combat when you need to push things forward. But you can't always use them. You can't always be pushing the players forward. The other thing to use is music. Up-tempo tracks for combat, ambient music for exploration, soft melodies for role-playing, these all have the ability to help you pace just by using the appropriate music. Using Spotify, using the Sirenscape, there's a ton of different methods you can use to use music in your game. Initiative trackers is another wonderful way. Allowing people to see where they are on initiative knows that, hey, you're coming up next, you're on deck. That can help push combat through so people are like, oh, it's my turn? Because sometimes if someone takes too long or there's 6 people at a table, we're spending a lot of time waiting. Knowing before you're up, hey, what do you do? By the way, John, you're on deck, right? Oh, okay. Using those initiative trackers can help push combat forward. Now, something that's different to me that I just was introduced to is scene cards. These are pre-made descriptions to keep the scene snappy. So I'm not spending a ton of time. I may have a description card for that scene. It's not a fully flushed out thing, but it's a description that I can read to the players that has my points, things to avoid, things to be of interest, so I don't miss anything. Just a simple little index card that you can use. It's a great way to make sure your descriptions are on point and thought of beforehand, but at the same time, you're not trying to recoup a novel to do your description. And so here are some final tips when it comes to pacing in a Dungeons & Dragons or really any TTRPG. Number 1, alternate beats between fast and slow. Combat, rest, roleplay, puzzle. When you alternate the speed of those beats, and a puzzle can be a fast beat and a combat can be a slow beat, you create that roller coaster. That roller coaster allows us to feel engaged. If someone talks monotonously at you, whether it's fast or slow, it becomes tiresome. The ebb and flow of pacing is what makes a game feel engaging. One thing I tend to stick to as a tool is keeping combat fast. When combat seems to drag, that's the one place where it should always be fast. Now, I've played some slow combats before that are incredibly tactical and they're incredibly rewarding. But for the most part, in most role-playing games, combat should feel fast and chaotic, but not overwhelming to the players. So try to do that. Keep your combat fast, exploration choice-driven, and your role-playing engaging. If your exploration is choice-driven, then the players feel like they're involved in the speed of the game and how fast they're moving through it. And if role-playing is engaging and to a point with a purpose and not just typical banter, the players will feel like they're moving the story forward. Pacing in the end comes from a variety of different speeds, but in all cases, it feels like we are moving forward. And finally, read your room. If players are tired, cut the reward and the rest scene. If the players want to move on faster, cut it that way. If the players want to slow combat down because they're engaged, do that. Read your players. When are your players most engaged? What are they doing? How are they involved? That's a big one. So just keep those things in mind, guys. And as always, what's your best tricks as a dungeon master? Share it in the comments below. What are your tricks, and tips for keeping pacing involved, engaged? What do you like from pacing-wise? Players, tell us what you don't like, so that way dungeon masters can read it. And as always, guys, make sure you like, make sure you subscribe, make sure you share, and make sure you comment, and come back for Dungeon Master tips every Monday now. And we'll see you when? We will see you next time.